They called her Mama Abeni, in the village of Ndlovu, a quiet place where the earth was red, and the air smelled of burning wood and sweet mangoes. Mama Abeni had once been the happiest woman in the village, with a husband who sang like the morning, birds and 2 sons who chased goats through the dusty fields. But fate, cruel and careless, had robbed her of it all. Her husband fell to a fever one rainy season, and her sons, both barely grown, were taken by a wave of sickness that swept through the village like a silent thief. After the funerals, the world around Mama Abeni felt hollow, as if even the trees mourned with her. She lived alone in a small mud house on the edge of the village. Her hair, once thick and black, was now wrapped in faded scarves. She made a small living by weaving mats and baskets from palm fronds, selling them for a few coins at the dusty market every week. But no matter how hard she worked, she stayed, poor, counting every grain of rice before boiling it. One day, as the sun baked the earth into cracks, a boy came to her. He was barefoot, his ribs showing through his thin skin, his clothes little more than torn rags. His name was Kofi. His mother had died giving birth to him, and his father, some said, was nothing but a spirit wandering the forest. Kofi begged for food from the villagers, but most had little to give and even less kindness. Mama Abeni saw something in the boy's eyes, not just hunger, but a sadness deeper than an empty belly. She sat him down outside her house and shared what little she had, a bowl of watery millet porridge and a few slices of dried mango. The boy ate with trembling hands, his eyes wide with disbelief. That night, Mama Abeni made a decision. She went to the wooden box under her sleeping mat and pulled out the worn leather pouch where she kept her life savings, a small pile of coins she had gathered over many long years, dreaming of buying a cow someday. She pressed the pouch into Kofi's hands and told him, "Go, find the town beyond the mountains, find the school they say is there, learn, become more than this village will allow." Kofi cried, holding the pouch as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He promised to come back, to not forget her. Mama Abeni smiled and nodded, though deep in her heart she thought she would never see him again. That was the way of life. The young always left, and the old stayed behind like the roots of the baobab tree. Years slipped by like water through fingers. Mama Abeni grew older, her hands gnarled from weaving, her back bent like the river reeds. The villagers whispered that she was foolish to have given her last treasure to a boy who would surely forget her once he tasted the town life. They said she had cursed herself to die alone. One dry season, when the rivers had shrunk and the grass was brittle underfoot, strangers came to the village, not with spears and anger, but with papers and promises. Men from the city, wearing crisp clothes and cold smiles. They came to build something, they said, and they needed the land. The villagers, simple and unlettered, did not understand the contracts they were asked to sign. All they saw were the promises of money, of roads, of something better. Mama Abeni, stubborn and sharp despite her years, refused to sign. She didn't trust the strangers, didn't trust the gleam in their eyes. She became a thorn in their side, speaking out at gatherings under the old fig tree. Some of the younger men muttered that she was standing in the way of progress. Others simply ignored her, too busy dreaming of the riches they thought were coming. One evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, Mama Abeni heard footsteps outside her hut. She thought it was one of the children bringing her a leftover yam or a message from the chief. But when she opened her door, she found 2 men she did not recognize. Their faces were hard, their voices colder than iron. Without warning, they grabbed her. They bound her hands, gagged her mouth. Mama Abeni struggled, her old bones aching, her heart pounding in terror. They dragged her into the bush, away from the village, where no one could hear her cries, and just when it seemed like the darkness would swallow her whole, a voice shattered the night air. "Leave her!" The men turned, startled, and standing there, holding a thick branch like a club, was a tall young man with skin dark as polished mahogany and a fire in his eyes. Mama Abeni's heart stuttered. She knew that face. Though it was older, stronger, no longer the starving boy she once fed, she knew it as surely as she knew the sound of her own breath. "Kofi," she whispered through the gag. The 2 men hesitated for a moment, glancing at each other as if deciding whether to fight or run. Kofi didn't give them the chance. With a roar that shook the trees, he swung the branch, striking the nearest man on the shoulder. The man cried out and stumbled backward, clutching his arm. The second man, seeing his companion fall, dropped Mama Abeni roughly to the ground and sprinted into the darkness, fear making his feet faster than his heart. The one who stayed tried to fight, but he was no match for Kofi's strength. After a few blows, he too ran, limping into the shadows. Kofi stood breathing hard. The branch still raised, his chest heaving with anger. Only when he was sure they were gone did he turn and kneel beside Mama Abeni. "Easy, Mama, easy," he whispered, his voice softer now. His hands, rough but gentle, untied the ropes and removed the gag from her mouth. Tears blurred Mama Abeni's vision as she clutched his face between her trembling hands. "Kofi, Kofi, my son." He smiled, that same smile she remembered from the day he left, full of gratitude and hope. "I told you I would come back," he said. She could hardly believe it. The boy she had once saved had become a man, strong, proud, fearless. And now, when she had needed him most, he had come to save her in return. Kofi helped her to her feet and draped his arm around her to support her weight. Together they made their slow way back to the village, the stars lighting their path. Every step was painful for Mama Abeni, but she leaned into Kofi's strength, her heart full for the first time in many years. At the edge of the village, people gathered, drawn by the noise and the rumor of trouble. When they saw Kofi, their mouths fell open. He was no longer the ragged boy they had pitied. He wore fine boots, a sturdy shirt, and carried the confidence of a man who had seen the world beyond their small fields. A jeep stood at the side of the dusty road, its headlights still on, engine purring like a lazy lion. The village chief, old and heavy with rings on his fingers, pushed through the crowd. "Who are you to cause trouble in my village?" he demanded, though his voice wavered when he saw Mama Abeni bruised and pale. Kofi's gaze was steady. "My name is Kofi Abeni," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "I am the son of this village, the son of Mama Abeni, who you left to die." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some villagers looked down at their feet, ashamed. Others whispered angrily, realizing the chief had let the outsiders hurt one of their own. "I have come," Kofi continued, "not just to take her back, but to help this village, to save it from the men who would steal your land and leave you with nothing." The chief laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "And what can a boy do against men from the city?" "I am not just a boy anymore," Kofi said. His voice was calm but heavy with power. "I am a lawyer. I studied with the money Mama Abeni gave me. I know the laws, I know the tricks they use. I have come to fight for what is yours, if you will stand with me." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Mama Abeni squeezed his hand, her voice a whisper, but full of pride. "I knew you would become something great, my son." The chief frowned, unsure how to react. Power was slipping from his grasp, and he felt it like sand through his fingers. The villagers looked between Kofi and the chief, the old and the new, the past and the future. Finally, an elder woman stepped forward, leaning heavily on her walking stick. "I will stand with you, Kofi," she said. "If Mama Abeni trusts you, then so do I." One by one, others followed, until a chorus of voices rose under the starlit sky. Hope, long buried under years of dust and fear, began to grow in their hearts. Kofi turned to Mama Abeni, his voice soft. "Tomorrow, Mama. Tomorrow we fight. Together." And for the first time in many years, Mama Abeni smiled a smile that touched her soul. Not because she was safe, not because she was avenged, but because the seed she had planted long ago in kindness had grown into something strong enough to change the world. The next morning, the sun rose like a fiery drum across the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and red. The villagers gathered under the ancient fig tree, where meetings had been held for generations. It was a sacred place where truth was meant to be spoken and justice demanded. Kofi stood at the center, a pile of papers tucked under his arm, his back straight and eyes clear. Mama Abeni sat on a stool nearby, a faded scarf wrapped around her head, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Though her body ached from the night before, she refused to miss this day. This was her fight, too. The city men arrived with smug smiles, wearing sunglasses and carrying clipboards. Behind them, a few tough-looking men leaned against shiny trucks, arms crossed, daring anyone to stop them. They didn't expect trouble from a small village. They had seen it all before, poor farmers dazzled by empty promises, signing away their land for pennies. But today was different. Kofi stepped forward, raising his hand. "Before any signing," he said loudly, "the village must know the truth." The chief shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. He could feel the tide turning against him. Kofi began to explain, his voice steady and clear. He showed them the papers the city men had brought, how the contracts were filled with lies, how the villagers were not being given ownership of new land, but were actually selling their homes forever for a few coins. How once signed, they would have no rights to come back, no right to complain, no right even to their ancestors' graves. Gasps and murmurs rose from the villagers. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Elder men shook their heads in disbelief. Some of the younger ones, who had been dreaming of riches, felt shame burning in their cheeks. One of the city men laughed mockingly. "And who are you to tell them? This? Just a village boy in shoes too big for him." Kofi smiled, not angrily, but almost sadly. He pulled a worn leather book from his bag, his law diploma, signed and stamped by the university. He held it up high for all to see. "I am a lawyer," he said simply. "I studied your language, your laws, your games. I know every trick you use, and today, in front of all these witnesses, I say, if you steal from this village, you will answer not just to me, but to the courts of the land." The city men looked at each other, suddenly less sure. Legal problems were the last thing they wanted. Dealing with villagers was easy, until the villagers fought back smart. Kofi wasn't finished. He turned to the villagers. "You have the right to your land. It belongs to you. Your fathers' fathers planted these trees, drank from these rivers. No one can take that from you unless you let them." A heavy silence settled. Then Mama Abini, slow but strong, stood up from her stool. She raised her voice, cracked but proud. "This land holds the bones of my children. It holds the sweat of my husband. It holds my life. We will not sell it for gold that turns to dust." One by one, the villagers stepped forward, each refusing to sign, each choosing to stand. The chief, sensing he had lost, tried to speak, to salvage his pride. But nobody listened anymore. His power, built on fear and greed, crumbled like dry earth under rain. Frustrated, the city men packed up their papers and left, cursing under their breath, tires spitting dust as they sped away. When they were gone, a cheer erupted under the fig tree. People clapped Kofi on the back, women ululated in joy, and even the old men smiled with tears in their eyes. Mama Abeni sat quietly, watching it all, her heart swelling. Kofi knelt beside her and pressed his forehead to her hand in a gesture of deep respect. "You saved me when I had nothing, Mama," he said softly. "Today it was my turn." She laughed, a sound like music. "No, my son," she whispered. "Today you saved us all." The sun climbed higher, and for the first time in many years, Ndlovu village felt like it belonged to its people once again, stronger, wiser, unbroken. But Kofi knew this was just the beginning. There were still battles to fight, still wounds to heal, still dreams to build, and he vowed as long as breath filled his lungs, he would be there, for his people, for his home, and most of all, for the woman who had once seen hope in a starving boy. The days that followed were like waking from a long, heavy sleep. For years, the village had lived under a shadow, afraid of change, afraid of losing even the little they had. But now, something new stirred in their hearts. Hope was no longer just a word whispered around cooking fires. It was alive, breathing. Through the narrow paths and under the thatched roofs of Ndlovu, Kofi did not waste time. He knew that the men from the city might come back, and next time they would not come with simple lies. They would come with stronger weapons, sharper traps. The village needed to be ready. Every evening under the fig tree, he gathered the people and taught them. He showed them how to read the land titles, how to understand what they were signing. He explained their rights, their power, their strength, when united. At first the old men struggled, squinting at the papers, muttering about the small letters. The young ones, more curious, picked up quickly, passing what they learned to their elders. Children sat wide-eyed at the edges, absorbing every word like the dry earth soaks up rain. Mama Abeni always sat at the front, listening carefully, her head nodding in pride with every lesson. Sometimes, when Kofi looked at her, he thought about how different his life could have been if she had not given him that pouch of coins long ago. He could have been another forgotten boy, swallowed by hunger and dust. Instead, he had returned with a weapon stronger than any spear, knowledge. But change never comes without enemies. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and shadows grew long, word came that the chief had left the village. Disgraced, he had packed his belongings and gone to the city, leaving his empty house behind. Some people whispered he had gone to find new allies, men who would finish what the others had started. Kofi knew it wasn't over. That night, while most of the village slept, a fire broke out near Mama Abeni's hut. Flames leaped into the sky, smoke curling into the stars. Villagers ran with buckets of water, shouting, trying to fight the fire before it spread. Kofi was the first to reach Mama Abeni's house. Without hesitation, he burst inside, coughing through the thick smoke. He found her sitting calmly on her bed as if she had been expecting him. "I am not afraid, my son," she said, her voice strong despite the heat around them. "I have seen worse flames." Kofi wrapped a wet cloth around her and lifted her in his arms, carrying her out as the roof began to collapse behind them. The villagers managed to save most of the house, beating down the fire with branches and water. When the smoke finally cleared, Mama Abeni's hut stood blackened but still standing. It was no accident. Someone had lit that fire. Someone who wanted to scare them back into silence. But it had the opposite effect. The next morning, when Kofi called the meeting under the fig tree, even more villagers came. Their faces were grim, determined. They had seen the danger. Now they were ready to fight it with everything they had. "We will rebuild," Kofi told them, his voice steady like the earth beneath their feet. "Not just houses. We will rebuild this village with strong hands and stronger hearts. No one will burn away our future." The people cheered, a deep roaring sound that echoed off the hills. Together they set to work. The men cut fresh wood from the forest. The women mixed mud for bricks. The children carried water in old calabashes, singing as they went. And in the center of it all, Mama Abeni sat on a mat, weaving new baskets, her hands moving with the wisdom of years. She watched Kofi moving among the people, not as a ruler, not as a savior, but as a son of the soil, working side by side with his brothers and sisters. As the days turned into weeks, the village began to change, not with shiny city buildings or paved roads, but with stronger homes, smarter leaders, and a spirit that could no longer be bought or burned away. Kofi and Mama Abeni often sat together in the evenings, watching the sunset turn the sky into a painting of fire and gold. "You were my light, Mama," he would say softly. "And you were my seed," she would reply with a smile. "And now you are my tree." Their bond was no longer just of charity and gratitude. It was deeper, rooted in the kind of love that survives even when the world tries to tear it apart. But far beyond the hills, new threats were stirring, bigger, richer, crueler. Kofi knew their fight was not yet done. The real battle for Ndlovu's future was still to come. Weeks passed, and Ndlovu breathed easier for the first time in years. The village huts looked stronger, the fields greener, the laughter of children a little louder. But peace in this world never stays for long, especially when greed has already tasted the scent of easy prey. One evening, as the sky bruised purple and black with a coming storm, a convoy of black SUVs rolled into the village. They stirred up clouds of dust and fear. No one needed to be told this was not a friendly visit. Men in suits stepped out first, their faces hard and polished like stones. Behind them, soldiers in crisp uniforms, not from the government but hired men, carrying rifles and arrogance. The leader was a tall man with skin like polished coal and a thick gold chain swinging around his neck. His name was Mr. Adeyemi, a man whose reputation reached even the farthest villages. He was a businessman, they said, but people also whispered darker things, that he had villages under his boots and entire councils in his pockets. Mr. Adeyemi stood before the gathering villagers, smiling like a hyena showing its teeth. "I hear there has been some confusion," he said, his voice smooth and poisonous. "I have come to solve it." Kofi stepped forward, his body tense but his face calm. "There is no confusion. This land is ours. It is not for sale." A ripple of courage passed through the villagers standing behind him, their faces set like stones. Mr. Adeyemi chuckled, low and mocking. "Young man," he said, shaking his head, "everything is for sale. You only have to find the right price." He nodded once, and two of his men dragged a heavy sack from one of the SUVs. They dropped it at Kofi's feet. The sack burst open slightly, revealing bundles of crisp money. More than the entire village could dream of earning in a lifetime. Gasps escaped from the crowd. Some of the villagers shifted, eyes wide, hands twitching. Kofi didn't even look at the money. He only had eyes for Mr. Adeyemi. "We are not fools," he said coldly. "We do not sell our mothers for gold." The smile slipped from Adeyemi's face. His eyes hardened. "You think you are a hero," he said, stepping closer until their faces were only inches apart. "I have crushed better men than you without lifting a finger." "You can try," Kofi said, his voice steady, "but this village will stand." For a long moment the two men stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. Then Adeyemi laughed again, stepping back. "Very well," he said, waving a hand. "Enjoy your mud huts, enjoy your dying crops. When hunger comes, and it will, you will come begging." He turned to leave, but not before adding, "And next time, maybe I won't be so polite." The SUVs roared away, leaving behind a silence heavy with fear. Kofi turned to the villagers. He saw the doubt creeping into their faces, the worry. The money had been real. The threat had been real. Hunger was a real enemy too, maybe more frightening than any businessman. He knew he had to act fast. That night, he met with the elders, with the women, with the young people. They sat under the open sky, a small fire crackling in the center. Kofi spoke not with anger, but with truth. "If we take his money," he said, "it will be sweet today and bitter for the rest of our lives. He will own us. He will strip this land, poison the rivers, cut down the trees. Our children will have no homes, only memories of what we lost." He looked around the circle, his voice thick with emotion. "But if we stand, if we plant and build with our own hands, no one can ever take it from us again." Mama Abini, who had been quiet until now, spoke up in her gentle but fierce voice. "A meal eaten in fear tastes of ashes. A meal earned in pride tastes sweeter than honey." The villagers sat in heavy silence, the fire reflecting in their eyes. One by one they nodded. They would stand, even if it meant facing storms, hunger, and men like Adeyemi, even if it meant suffering for a time. Because there are things worth more than money, things worth fighting for. Their land, their ancestors, their children's future, and the promise that, for once, the people of Ndlovu would decide their own fate. The next days were heavy with a strange tension, like the air before. A violent storm. Everyone in the village carried on as usual, planting cassava, weaving mats, tending goats. But there was an uneasiness in every glance, every whispered conversation. They all knew Adeyemi would not give up so easily. Kofi didn't sleep much. He spent his nights walking the village boundaries, making sure no strangers crept in. Every evening he spoke with the villagers under the fig tree, making plans to protect their homes. He taught them how to record their land ownership properly, how to send messages quickly if trouble came. But sometimes, battles aren't lost to outside enemies. They are lost when someone inside the walls opens the gate. It happened on a hot afternoon when the sky was cloudless and cruel. The village was called to gather by the beating of the drums, an urgent, strange rhythm. Kofi knew at once something was wrong. When he reached the center, he found a group of men standing beside a stranger, a lawyer from the city, well-dressed, carrying a stack of new papers. Behind them, looking both proud and nervous, stood Musa, one of the young men Kofi had trusted most. Musa's voice shook slightly as he spoke. We have reconsidered," he said. "We will sell part of the land, only a small piece. Enough. To build a road, maybe a few shops. It will bring wealth, it will bring jobs. Kofi felt like he had been punched in the gut. He stared at Musa, disbelief and betrayal battling inside him. "You made this decision without the village council," Kofi said, his voice dangerously calm. "The elders are old," Musa snapped back, avoiding Kofi's eyes. "They don't understand the future. We are the future." The lawyer smiled thinly, stepping forward. "All we need are a few signatures. Then the money will come, progress will come." For a heartbeat, it felt like the village itself held its breath. Mama Abeni rose slowly from her stool. Her face was carved with lines of age and sorrow, but her eyes burned with a fire no one could miss. She walked to Kofi and put her wrinkled hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "You must speak, my son," she said simply. Kofi turned to the villagers, his voice low but powerful. "You think they will stop with a small piece? Today a road, tomorrow your fields, then your rivers, then your graves." He turned his eyes to Musa, who shifted uncomfortably. "You think they will build a future for us? No. They will take our future and sell it to the highest bidder." The villagers murmured, uneasy, torn between hope and fear, dreams and memory. Kofi took a step closer to Musa. "Brother, think. Once you sell even a handful of our land, you no longer hold it. You have nothing to bargain with, nothing to protect." Musa's face crumpled for a moment, doubt flickering in his eyes. But the lawyer whispered something in his ear and Musa stiffened again. The lawyer pulled out a pen, offering it to the villagers. "Decide now. The future will not wait." For a moment the world hung in silence, and then Mama Abeni did something no one expected. She stood between the villagers and the lawyer, her back straight despite her age. She took the pen from the lawyer's hand and snapped it in two, tossing the pieces into the dirt. A gasp went through the crowd. "We are not for sale," she said, her voice clear as a bell. Slowly the villagers moved, one by one, gathering behind her, behind Kofi. Even those who had been tempted by the money realized the truth now. The lawyer's smile faded. He gathered his papers in a fury and stormed off, Musa trailing behind, looking ashamed. Kofi stood quietly for a long moment, his heart heavy. He knew the betrayal of Musa had cut deep, but he also knew that today the village had chosen its soul over silver. "Mama," Abeni reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "The tree bends in the storm," she said softly, "but it does not break." Kofi smiled, though sadness still clung to his heart. The war wasn't over, but today they had won a battle, and he knew that, with Mama Abeni at his side, and the spirit of the ancestors behind him, no amount of gold or threat could ever uproot the people of Ndlovu, not if they stood together. The next few days were strangely quiet, too quiet, as if the village was holding its breath, waiting for something bad to fall from the sky. Even the birds seemed to sing less, and the goats bleated nervously at night. Kofi stayed alert, knowing Adjemi was not a man to accept defeat quietly. He moved from house to house, checking on families, making sure the village defenses, what little they had, were ready. Men sharpened machetes, and young boys were posted as lookouts at the edges of the village. Mama Abeni sat under the fig tree most days, weaving baskets with calm, steady hands, but her eyes missed nothing. Then, on the 5th day, the real storm came. It wasn't soldiers this time. It was a bulldozer. Just after sunrise, a massive yellow machine roared into the fields, flattening everything in its path, cassava plants, yams, even young banana trees. Dust filled the air. Behind the bulldozer came workers wearing hard hats and carrying flags marking the land. None of them cared about the villagers shouting and waving their hands. Adeyemi had found another way to take what he wanted. Force, without words, destruction without contracts. The villagers gathered quickly, furious and frightened, but no one dared step in front of the machine. It was too big, too loud, too merciless. Kofi stood at the front, his fists clenched, his heart pounding. He had fought with words, he had fought with laws, but now it seemed fists and blood were the only language left. Without thinking, he sprinted forward. He stood directly in front of the bulldozer, arms spread wide. The driver hesitated for a moment, honked the horn in warning, but Kofi didn't move. Behind him, one by one, The villagers stepped out, forming a human wall. Oldie. Men, young women, children, even Mama Abini, her back stooped but her spirit fierce, stood beside him. The bulldozer engine growled, frustrated. The driver cursed, yelling out the window. But he couldn't drive through them without killing them, and even Adeyemi's greed wouldn't stretch that far, not openly. From one of the parked trucks, Adeyemi himself stepped out, wearing a dark suit and sunglasses, as if this was just another day's business. He walked slowly toward the crowd, stopping a few feet away from Kofi. "You think you can stop progress with your bare hands?" Adeyemi sneered. "This isn't progress," Kofi said, his voice steady. "It's theft." Adeyemi removed his sunglasses, his eyes sharp and cold. "You've made powerful enemies, boy. You'll regret this." Kofi didn't flinch. "Maybe," he said, "but at least I'll still have a home to regret it in." For a moment it looked like Adeyemi would order the bulldozer forward anyway. His face twisted with rage, but then he noticed something. Else, phones. The younger villagers were holding up their cheap old phones, recording everything. And Kofi knew, Adeyemi knew, one wrong move caught on video, and the world outside their little corner would know the truth. With a furious curse, Adeyemi spat into the dirt and signaled his men to pull back. The bulldozer rumbled into silence. The trucks turned around, tires spraying dust, and rolled away toward the horizon. The villagers erupted into cheers, clapping Kofi on the back, ululating, singing the old songs of victory. But Kofi didn't celebrate. He stood still, breathing hard, watching the ruined fields. They had saved the land, for now, but at a terrible price. The crops that fed the village were gone. They would face a hard season of hunger before new seeds could be planted. New food could grow. Mama Abini came to his side, resting a hand on his arm. "You chose the harder road, my son," she said, her voice soft but full of pride. "But it is the right road." Kofi looked at her, feeling the heavy weight of leadership, of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "We'll rebuild, Mama," he said quietly. "Even if we have to start from stones and dust, we'll rebuild." And standing there, surrounded by the smoke of crushed plants and the hope of unbroken spirits, Kofi made a silent vow. No matter what storms came, he would stand for the village, for Mama Abeni, for the future that had been born from her kindness. Long ago, when a starving boy first knocked on her door. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest Ndlovu had ever seen. With their crops destroyed, food became scarcer with each passing day. Meals were simple: boiled roots, wild fruits, and sometimes nothing but water flavored with herbs. Children grew thinner, mothers worried deep into the night, and even the strongest men had shadows under their eyes. But even in the middle of suffering, something beautiful grew stronger: unity. The villagers worked side by side, tilling the soil, clearing the broken fields, replanting seeds wherever they could find even a patch of good earth. Men hunted deeper into the forests. Women shared what little they cooked with the oldest and weakest among them. Nobody was left behind. Not this time. Kofi didn't just lead with speeches, he led with sweat. His hands were blistered from digging, his back sore from carrying water pots, but he never stopped. And whenever despair crept into the edges of his mind, all he had to do was glance toward the edge of the field, where Mama Abeni sat weaving baskets under the fig tree, a peaceful anchor in a world that had almost broken. One evening, as a cool breeze stirred the dry leaves, Kofi sat beside her. They both watched the setting sun paint the cracked earth in gold. "You should rest, Mama," Kofi said, glancing at the tired lines on her face. "I rest when I weave," she replied with a smile. Her fingers moved rhythmically, tying strand after strand into something useful, something lasting. "Besides, who says an old tree cannot help build a new forest?" Kofi chuckled softly, but then his smile faded. "Sometimes I wonder if I was right to bring this fight here," he confessed. "They suffer because of me." Mama Abini set down her half-finished basket and took his hand, her touch as steady as the roots of the oldest trees. "My son," she said, looking deep into his troubled eyes, "suffering came long before you. It was hiding in the smiles of men who promised gold and gave chains instead. You did not bring the suffering. You tore the mask off it. Kofi swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle into his heart. The land is still ours, she continued. The rivers still sing, the ancestors still walk among us. You gave us the one thing we forgot we had, the right to say no. Tears pricked Kofi's eyes, but he blinked them away. There was still too much to do, too many seeds left to plant. Seasons changed. The rains returned, falling heavy and sweet. Over Ndlovu, tiny green shoots pierced the red earth, a promise of better days. The village slowly rebuilt its strength, one meal, one repaired hut, one harvested field at a time. The city men never came back. Perhaps they realized the spirit of Ndlovu could not be broken, not by money, not by threats, not by hunger. Word of the village that fought back traveled far. Other villages sent messengers, asking Kofi for advice, for help in understanding. The papers the city men brought. He helped them too, moving from village to village, planting the seeds of knowledge like a patient farmer. And always, when he returned, Mama Abeni was waiting at the edge of the village, a woven basket full of roasted maize and a smile that could outshine the sun. Years later, when Kofi built a real school on the land where the fig tree stood, he named it after her, the Abeni School of Wisdom. Children would sit under the same fig tree, books in hand, learning to read, to think, to fight for what was right. And sometimes when the breeze was just right, the children said they could hear the fig tree whisper stories, stories of a poor widow who gave her last coin to a starving boy, and how that small act of kindness changed a whole world. In the end, Mama Abeni's gift was not just the money she gave to a boy. It was the future she planted, the hope she watered, the courage she passed down like a sacred fire that would never, ever burn out. And Kofi, the boy who once had nothing but empty hands and a full heart, became the man who gave everything back, and more. The village of Ndlovu remembered, the world remembered, and in the songs of the people they lived forever. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest Ndlovu had ever seen. With their crops destroyed, food became scarcer with each passing day. Meals were simple, boiled roots, wild fruits, and sometimes nothing but water flavored with herbs. Children grew thinner, mothers worried deep into the night, and even the strongest men had shadows under their eyes. But even in the middle of suffering, something beautiful grew stronger: unity. The villagers worked side by side, tilling the soil, clearing the broken fields, replanting seeds wherever they could find even a patch of good earth. Men hunted deeper into the forests. Women shared what little they cooked with the oldest and weakest among them. Nobody was left behind. Not this time. Kofi didn't just lead with speeches, he led with sweat. His hands were blistered from digging, his back sore from carrying water pots, but he never stopped. And whenever despair crept into the edges of his mind, all he had to do was glance toward the edge of the field, where Mama Abeni sat weaving baskets under the fig tree, a peaceful anchor in a world that had almost broken. One evening, as a cool breeze stirred the dry leaves, Kofi sat beside her. They both watched the setting sun paint the cracked earth in gold. "You should rest, Mama," Kofi said, glancing at the tired lines on her face. "I rest when I weave," she replied with a smile. Her fingers moved rhythmically, tying strand after strand into something useful, something lasting. Besides, who says an old tree cannot help build a new forest? Kofi chuckled softly, but then his smile faded. "Sometimes I wonder if I was right to bring this fight here," he confessed. "They suffer because of me." Mama Abeni set down her half-finished basket and took his hand, her touch as steady as the roots of the oldest trees. "My son," she said, looking deep into his troubled eyes, "suffering came long before you. It was hiding in the smiles of men who promised gold and gave chains instead. You did not bring the suffering. You tore the mask off it." Kofi swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle into his heart. "The land is still ours," she continued. "The rivers still sing. The ancestors still walk among us. You gave us the one thing we forgot we had, the right to say no." Tears pricked Kofi's eyes, but he blinked them away. There was still too much to do, too many seeds left to plant. Seasons changed. The rains returned, falling heavy and sweet over Ndlovu. Tiny green shoots pierced the red earth, a promise of better days. The village slowly rebuilt its strength, one meal, one repaired hut, one harvested field at a time. The city men never came back. Perhaps they realized the spirit of Ndlovu could not be broken, not by money, not by threats, not by hunger. Word of the village that fought back traveled far. Other villages sent messengers, asking Kofi for advice, for help in understanding. The papers the city men brought. He helped them too, moving from village to village, planting the seeds of knowledge like a patient farmer. And always, when he returned, Mama Abeni was waiting at the edge of the village, a woven basket full of roasted maize and a smile that could outshine the sun. Years later, when Kofi built a real school on the land where the fig tree stood, he named it after her, the Abeni School of Wisdom. Children would sit under the same fig tree, books in hand, learning to read, to think, to fight for what was right. And sometimes, when the breeze was just right, the children said they could hear the fig tree whisper stories, stories of a poor widow who gave her last coin to a starving boy, and how that small act of kindness changed a whole world. In the end, Mama Abeni's gift was not just the money she gave to a boy, it was the future she planted, the hope she watered, the courage she passed down like a sacred fire that would never, ever burn out. And Kofi, the boy who once had nothing but empty hands and a full heart, became the man who gave everything back, and more. The village of Ndlovu remembered, the world remembered, and in the songs of the people they lived forever.